The chef has prepared a terrifying feast that will satisfy the toughest critics. If you enjoy the best, only the best, hit the like and subscribe and devour that bell icon to get the best seat in the house when the chef has prepared a new dish of terrifying true stories. Now, take a seat. Dinner is served. A pretty creepy experience I had back in the early 2000s in Japan. A little background on me for context. I grew up as a biracial military brat and spent the better part of 2 decades growing up in Japan. Having spent years growing up in Japan and in the US, I can confidently say that there is something different when it comes to talk of paranormal or strange experiences. I imagine that many on the subreddit may be familiar with how popular spooky Asian stories have come in the last 20 or so years. So, read on to hear about some of the strangest occurrences I have encountered. During my late teens to my early 20s, my social circle and I had a naive obsession with exploring places in Japan known for paranormal activities, urban legends, and investigating creepy areas. This was prior to the advent of reality television really blowing up like ghost hunting shows. In Japan, shows like this would broadcast regularly in the summer, like October is the witching season for Western cultures. The month of August is for Japan. This was our motivation for partaking in these excursions. So here is my story. As a military brat who grew up in Japan while attending school on a US military installation, I graduated in the early 2000s. Following graduation, most of my graduating class moved back to the US to pursue college or start their adult lives. Most would leave and never return to Japan. My parent is Japanese, so I had every reason to return. It was December, and I had just returned home to Japan after my fall semester at college. To my relief, a couple of my friends chose to remain in Japan after high school. So I had friends to hang out with while home on vacation. One evening, I was out joyriding with my buddies. We had nowhere important to be and were just driving around aimlessly. Occasionally, we stopped by popular hangout spots for young adults, hoping to meet some cute Japanese girls to flirt with, as how else would a couple of young 19-year-old dudes want to spend an evening? My friend, whom I will call Jay, had a 90s Nissan Silvia, aka 240SX, outside of Japan for you car folks, and he was obsessed with drifting. Truth be told, he was not good at it. You really couldn't fault the guy for trying, though. That evening, he suggested that we take off to Asamizo Park near our hometown of Sagamihara, as this large public park had many parking lots peppered throughout its grounds. The lots were prime locations for him to practice whipping his car around while not causing damage or fender benders. Without hesitation, we all agreed and headed in that direction. About 20 minutes later, we passed the main entrance to Asamizo. During the day, this is a pleasant public park where many people recreate. Japan, in comparison to other countries, is a relatively safe country. This park was no exception to that notion. However, it did have some unfortunate events happen there. I will elaborate on this more later. After driving into the park for about 7 minutes, we reached the first parking lot. It was around 10 o'clock at night. We pulled in and parked. I hopped out of the car and pulled out a fresh pack of cigarettes and lit one up. The evening was brisk. I gazed around, letting my night vision calibrate as the lights far off in the distance twinkled. My other friend with us, R, also lit a cigarette, and we proceeded to have a conversation about whether Jay would be able to even get his car sideways. Jay pulled out and began to whip his car around the parking lot. As Jay's car spun counterclockwise, the wailing of his tires attempting to grip the asphalt broke the silence in the evening. Even now, I can close my eyes and still remember the smell of burning rubber. Into the parking lot. Adjacent to the parking lot was a tree line that led into some thick brush and wooded area. The park was known for its green belts scattered throughout it. I remember looking over my shoulder a few times evening because I had this feeling that we were being watched from the woods. But each time I scanned the tree line, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. What happened next would cause me to jump so hard that I laugh even now when thinking about it. The cell phone in my right pocket started ringing and vibrating, and I jumped with a fright. The fact that light paranoia had set in from watching the tree lines did not help with the anxiety experienced from the unexpected phone call. As I was attending college in the States and only back on vacation, I no longer had a cell phone in Japan. In fact, my younger sister had lent her phone to me so that I could be reached if necessary. I pulled the phone out thinking that she or my mother was calling for something, as none of my friends even had this number. I looked down at the green backlit LCD screen and saw displayed in Japanese was a restricted number. I thought it was strange, but figured maybe my sister was calling from a public phone. Yes, those were still a thing back then. I answered the phone and said, Moshi. Moshi. That's how you answer a phone in Japanese. And there was nothing but silence for a response. I remembered hearing a bit of static, and then finally I heard the voice of a Japanese girl. My immediate thought was, this must be a friend of my sister, and so I explained that I am her brother and borrowing her phone for the evening. If she needed to get a hold of my sister, she should ring the house. She apologized, and I reassured her that no harm had been done, and then promptly ended the phone call. I placed the cell phone back in my pocket and focused back on the ruckus of noise coming from Jay's car. It must have been not 10 minutes later. The cell phone in my pocket began ringing again. This time I was sure that it had to be my sister or my mother. Earlier that day, I left home and did not say where I was going or when I planned on returning home. It wasn't uncommon for my mother or sister to call and ask if I had eaten dinner, or if she should leave food out for when I would return. I pulled the phone out, and once again I had a phone call, and it was from a restricted number. I answered the phone, and this time the voice of the same Japanese girl was on the other end of the phone call. Before I could ask why she was calling for my sister, she cut me off. Now, based off the previous phone call, I thought there were a couple of things funny. I know most of my sister's friends and recognized their voices over the phone. This girl, on the other hand, I did not. Additionally, my sister never mentioned anything about new friends, and her circle was tight. She wasn't very big on being a social butterfly, but perhaps I was wrong. My sister is 3 years junior to me, and so my assumption was this girl had to be around my sister's age and too young for me. I had very little interest in engaging in conversation with her. As she probed me with questions, I kept my answers vague. I don't even know why I continued to entertain a conversation with her, but hanging up would just be very rude. Suddenly, she asked what I was doing in a park so late in the evening. I almost began to answer when it dawned on me. I did not mention anything about where I was or what I was doing. I told her I never said I was at a park. She lightly giggled and tried to play it off, insisting that she thought I said I was at a park. I told her this was weird and that I had to go, and hung up. Jay grew tired of drifting in this parking lot. He pulled up to us and, from the driver's side, suggested we change up the scenery. R and I hopped back in the vehicle and off we went. Now, at another parking lot, we hopped out and Jay continued to do his thing. This parking lot had soccer fields not too far from it, and the lamps in the parking lot painted an orange hue, which was a bit comforting. Oddly enough, the feeling of being watched returned to me. I swung around to my right and stared at the empty field on the other side of the parking lot fence. There was nothing. At this point, Jay parked his car and shut it off. Now silence and a thin film of burnt rubber veiled the parking lot. R started asking what was up with the phone calls. I began to explain to Jay and R what transpired. They both agreed that it was a little strange, but speculated that maybe my sister mentioned to her friends that her older brother was back in town. Jay proceeded to tease me that I should start talking to the chick, but I protested because I had no interest. Suddenly, my phone rang again. Same deal. Restricted phone number and same girl. This time, she sounded a bit more aggressive. "How come you left? What was wrong with the last spot?" I asked what she meant. She then said, "You left the last parking lot you were just at." I remember the hairs standing on the back of my neck. I made it a point to be vague and never mentioned what I was doing or where I was. Yet somehow, this girl knew what I was doing and knew that we had left the first parking lot. Something didn't feel right, so I hung up on her. A moment later, and my phone was blowing up. I answered again, this time irate. "What do you want?" There was silence, and then I heard light static. In a sort of hushed manner, I heard her voice. "I'm at the field. I see you." I spun around and faced the field, looking for any sign of a person. I remember my heart racing a bit as I fumbled to figure out what exactly was going on. "What do you mean you see me at the field?" I asked. She told me that she saw me standing with my friends wearing my gray jacket and my buddy's car. She told me that she was coming over to us and wanted to hang out. The line went dead. I looked at both J and R and gave the rundown on what she said. They both had weird looks on their faces, and I know them well enough to know when they're lying or pulling my leg. They both just looked clueless. My phone rang again. "Hey, I'm almost there. Will you wait for me?" the girl asked. No. What is going on here? Why do you keep asking me questions? How do you know where I am? Just who are you anyway? I know all my sister's friends, and I don't recognize your voice, I exclaimed. "I never said I knew your sister," she replied in another hushed manner. At this point, I was like, WTF? I looked back at the field, and I didn't see anything. As I was still on the phone with her, I asked where she was. She said that she would be there shortly. I'm sure my friends sensed the panic in my voice. Jay went on about how nobody knew we were out here. How does this chick seem to have our location? Mind you, this is 2000, and social media, internet 2.0, and smartphones are not a thing yet. People just can't get your location like that. On top of that, we are a few kilometers out of the way. You just don't randomly run into people like that. The evening was getting later, as it was past 11 p.m., and I had no explanation as to what was going on. My phone rang again, and before I could even answer hello, she asked if I could see her. I was spinning and jerking like a laundry machine agitator at this point. Both of my friends decided that this was too weird. R yanked the phone from my hand and proceeded to speak with her as well. I should explain that we all speak Japanese. Although I am telling this story in English, all the conversations that are happening are in Japanese. R, feeling like this is a joke, decided to toy with her a bit. He started to ask her what she was wearing. She began explaining something to him from what I could hear from how he responded. He then asked her what color her undergarments were, but then she abruptly hung up. R told me that he thinks he annoyed her enough that she may not bother calling again. We all nervously chuckled as we could not even begin to understand what had just transpired. My phone blew up again. Same deal, restricted call. I answered again, this time upset, but I was cut off. Her voice was much louder now. I could hear what sounded like wind in the background. She began saying that she was quickly approaching us, yelling to not leave her. She wanted to be with us. All of a sudden, I heard Jay drop a soda can as he faced the field. "What the fuck is that?" I remember Jay saying in disbelief. I hung the phone up. I looked at both my friends, and Jay motioned to jump in the car. We all jumped in, and he stomped on the gas as we made our escape. My phone rang again. I looked, and although I didn't want to answer, I felt as though I needed to. I took the call, and I could hear her voice. It sounded slightly huskier. She casually said, "It's a shame that you all left before I could reach you." Jay was driving frantically away from the park. At the time, I had no idea where he was taking us. It was just quiet in the car as I held the phone up to my ear. "Oh well, I guess I will just need to follow and find you all at the Family Mart that you're going to stop at," she said as she gave a creepy laugh. I then replied, "What the hell do you mean by the Family Mart that we are going to?" Before I realized it, Jay had cut the wheel hard, pulled to the side of the road, threw his four-way hazard lights on, and brought the car to a sudden stop. R damn near hit the dashboard sitting in the shotgun seat. Jay turned and looked at me. I can still remember the white look on his face. He then quietly asked, "How did she know I was taking us to Family Mart?" Family Mart is a Japanese convenience store chain found throughout Japan. I hung the phone up and then powered it off. We sat in silence for a moment there. This felt like a weird dream or something. I told Jay, let's go somewhere else. Shortly after, we drove to a 24-hour restaurant that was our hangout spot where many of our Japanese friends frequented. We just wanted somewhere brightly lit and somewhat crowded to chill out. As we walked up to the entrance, I could see some friends occupying a booth. We walked in and proceeded to join the party. After we ordered some coffee, we started explaining the strange occurrence. Initially, everyone listened on with excitement, but as I explained the story, the look of excitement written on everyone's face eventually faded and it got awkwardly quiet. Another female friend of mine who sat across from me I'll call her Achan, looked at me and asked again where in the park we were. As she asked me this, I could see her make eye contact with her boyfriend, H. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it just as he went into his explanation. He then began to explain, "You guys, you all do know what happened in Asamizo Park, right?" We all exchanged blank glances. Continuing, "There was an incident that happened in that park one evening, where a girl was walking through the park in the evening. Someone approached her and dragged her into the greenbelt where she was killed. I heard some rumors about some bad juju associated with the area." In disbelief, I scoffed, "You're joking, right?" Without any hesitation, he looked at me and said, "Nope, but we need to go to a shrine. Her spirit may have latched onto you." My friends and I definitely thought that something had taken a keen interest in me. Thankfully, I didn't receive any further calls after that night. I'm sure you can understand why I had no desire to return to that park to test any further theories, not even during daylight. The experience was just too bizarre and unexplainable, and it frightened me down to the core. At the time, I was just an 18-year-old kid, concerned that I may have inadvertently attracted a yurei, a Japanese ghost unable to pass into the afterlife. I visited a local shrine and explained what had occurred. The Shinto priest proceeded to perform a purification ritual on me. I also got a protective amulet to carry with me, if you believe in that sort of thing. After seeking help from the shrine, I never received another phone call. My sister also never received a call from a restricted number. I avoided the park for the rest of my time home during that vacation. Years later, I did return to the park. It's funny because although I had forgotten or perhaps suppressed those memories, they came rushing back to me when I returned. This time, it was during a pleasant afternoon. And no, I never received another call. Perhaps the yurei had passed on, or maybe it sought after another unfortunate person. Who knows? So this happened to me and my little brother, we'll name him Dylan for confidentiality purposes, when we lived together a few years back. I was a 25-year-old male and my little brother was 19. We were relaxing, playing some Halo 3 on the Xbox, smoking a bowl, just being brothers, hanging out on our usual days off from work. It was a Saturday night in the midsummer of 2009. We lived in a quiet neighborhood. The neighbors were just far enough apart to give you privacy, and they never got into your business. But we all knew each other as our parents had lived in the house for years, and it was our childhood home. When my parents retired, they moved off and left the house to us, so we never had to worry about a roof over our heads. Our house was at the end of the cul-de-sac, with a garage door to the right and our front door up 4 steps to the left of the window between our garage door, but from our kitchen, you could see straight out when the curtains were open. This particular night, however, would grow to haunt me and my brother to this day. After a few hardcore hours of gaming, around 3 in the morning, my brother needed to get up, stretch his legs, and relax his hands. He went downstairs to grab some water and a snack. Suddenly, Dylan came running up the stairs and locked the door, freaking out. I looked at him, confused as hell, barking, "Bro, what the fuck is wrong?" With a pale, ghost-white face, he looked at me and said, "There is a guy on the porch with his hands cuffed to the window, smiling from ear to ear." Then we heard 5 knocks at the door. We froze in our tracks, backing slowly away from the door. I got under my bed and grabbed the machete and bat I kept there in case I ever needed to defend myself. I watched too many zombie movies. I gave the bat to Dylan as he's taller than me and has longer arms, making it more beneficial for him. We tiptoed back to the bedroom door and unlocked it. We cracked the door open just enough to see out of. Then suddenly the man started knocking over and over and over. Before we knew it, he had knocked at least 30 times, and then it just stopped. I told Dylan to grab my cell phone and dial 911. He did, and dispatch sent officers our way immediately. While on the phone, the man went around to the back of our house because we heard screaming coming from the backyard. The man was there, just looking at the bedroom window with that creepy-ass smile. We stayed just out of the line of sight, peeking from the corners. Suddenly, the man took off in a full-on sprint and threw himself into our back door. We hollered, "Oh shit!" "He's trying to break in our back door," to the dispatch officer. She told units to step it up as he was trying to make entry. We heard the sirens closing in faster and faster as the man continued to bash himself into our door. On the third bash, we heard the door crash open. We stayed as quiet as possible, listening to things in the kitchen being smashed to hell and the man yelling, come out, wherever you are." I whispered to dispatch that he was downstairs in the kitchen, and she told officers he'd made entry. One unit said he was close. We readied our bat and machete as we heard footsteps creaking up the stairs. Then blue lights could be seen illuminating the house, and we heard, "Police! Police! Come out with your hands up! Make your presence known." The man booked it down the stairs and got tackled by officers and handcuffed after a bit of a struggle. We came out when the officers cleared the house and made sure it was safe. The man was high on meth, just looking to rob us to get another quick fix. We're so thankful the officer arrived when he did. We thanked him until the moment he left. He even came by from time to time to check on us and played video games with us a few times. I still get nightmares of that creepy-ass smile, and to whomever you are, creepy smiley man, I hope we never meet again. This is a relatively old story that my dad has told me a few times over the years, but with Halloween coming up, it's been on my mind again. I myself have never been able to witness the house, though the description I've been given by multiple men 20-something years after seeing it gave me a very vivid mental image. To begin, I would like to mention that my father is a highly religious man, a preacher's son, and does not believe in ghosts or anything paranormal in the slightest. Nothing seems to spook him either, but he still swears up and down that he felt something unnatural that scared the life out of him, even just from mentioning the story to me on the rare occasion that he would bring it up. Back in the late 80s, he and a few friends would regularly hike over the waterfall-style creek bed behind our farm, and would follow the trails until they eventually met the frontage road off the interstate. Well, one night they decided to take a different route to go around the backside of another farmer's land, mostly to see the animals because they owned emus and other large pets that weren't common in the local area. Supposedly, after leaving the area and continuing into the woods at night of all wonderful times, they managed to stumble upon what is described by all 5 men 20 years later as a Blair Witch look-alike house. It was a very, very old home, and my dad claims that just looking at it gave him this ominous feeling, but of course they had to go inside and check it out. Inside, the house was a vintage cottage-style home that was probably built in the late 40s or early 50s, and the group was instantly met with writing and symbols in strange, Latin-like languages, with a few English graffiti pieces that quoted a supposed satanic or pagan-worshipping ritual, with certain pieces describing how to sacrifice a human soul to some supposedly demonic deity. My father still claims to this day that certain symbols were painted on the walls in blood, while others were clearly spray paint. I find it easier to believe because he also worked as a firefighter for years before this happened and had a lot of experience with having to see human blood and dismembered bodies on the freeway after car accidents. Past a small living/kitchen area was a stairwell that was so small that their shoulders would physically brush either side of the wall as they went up. The stairs went straight, stopped at a small landing, then turned right. So as you started up, you could not see what might be standing at the top. At the top of the stairs, a door led to a large attic-styled bedroom where actual chain manacles and locks hung from one of the walls near a circular window at the end of the room. The room was completely covered in weird symbols, graffiti, and large dried puddles of blood that had seeped into the floors and walls. Allegedly, once they were upstairs investigating the room, they swear that they heard someone moving up the stairwell behind them quickly, but when they looked back, there was no one there. Everyone essentially told me that it sounded almost like heels clacking on wood. Now completely spooked, they rushed back down the stairs to see if someone was playing a prank on them and was hiding downstairs. Surprise, surprise, they found nothing, and no new footprints in the dust and grime that differed from the ones they left on their way in. To keep things interesting, I met with each of the guys separately to ask them about what they remembered, expecting to maybe find a crack or something to prove that maybe they were exaggerating. When I asked them, I got the same answer from each of them with no hesitation. They got the same details right down to the minute that they entered the house and the minute they left. But here's where it gets really strange. They left the house and for some unknown reason decided to try walking back from a different route, using a compass to approach from the east instead of the south. They did this test more than 10 times that night, walking from every possible route or direction. Yet, they always came out at the front entrance of the house, even when the compass and common knowledge of the area showed that it was physically impossible to be at the south end of the house when they moved in a straight line from the north, east, or west. There probably is some scientific explanation for it, but I haven't found one yet. These guys knew those woods literally like the back of their hand, and still do to this day. The final time that the guys came back and found themselves standing at the front door of the house, they began to feel physically ill, verging on feverish, and finally decided that it was time to give up when one of them nearly fainted. As they turned to leave, the man who nearly fainted turned, looked up, and pointed at the circular window at the front of the house on the second story. Everyone looked and immediately saw a tall female figure hunched over standing in the window watching them. They saw no features on her face other than two large dark-colored eyes. She sort of shuffled in place slightly before turning and walking away as if heading to the stairs at the end of the room. At the sight of the figure actually moving, they all took off, running through the woods, ending up on the side of the interstate about 3 miles from my dad's house, where they originally started from. They eventually made it back to my dad's place, though they claim that they felt as if someone were following them the entire way. My dad's cousin got up to get some water from the kitchen, only to announce that he swore he saw the same figure standing outside the kitchen window near the edge of the woods, close to the woodshed. Thankfully, nothing ever came from the experience other than a collective state of absolute terror when the subject is brought up. They wrote off what my dad's cousins saw as paranoia or pareidolia, though 5 years later they decided to return to see if the house was still standing. Miraculously, it had fallen in on itself and was nothing more than a pile of rubble, and they never went back. I always joked with my dad and would ask him what he would do if he went back and found the house standing the same way it had back then, trying to give him a reason to let me go and see the place for myself. But with trespassing laws being far more prevalent in today's times, it would be nearly impossible without I'd either getting caught or going to jail, as it was not on our property. I don't know, it always gives me the creeps thinking about it. But I never considered the story to be true until I did this little mock interview with all of the guys. And when I say that these grown men are scared to death by this story, I mean it. Seeing them get physically worked up and frightened by just telling the story really caused me to be less of a skeptic. What do you guys think? Could it be possible that they were just spooked and it caused them to see things? Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007 to 2008, my friends and I would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. It was a very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, 2 bathrooms, and one room we never knew the purpose of because it was always locked. The school hadn't kept up with the 80s modernization of our town and quickly closed down in favor of new schools and buildings by the end of the 80s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever got out of school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure everything was empty and safe. These buildings were known as a local spot for drug addicts, and used needles were a common sight for us. One day, a friend and I were the first to get out of school. As usual, we walked down to the building. Upon entering and stepping out from the classroom into the hallway, we immediately saw a large man. My friend let out a huge scream. The man didn't appear shocked or scared. He turned to look at us and then asked, "Have you guys seen insert my friend's name here?" We told him we hadn't seen anyone and had only just arrived. He sighed, shrugged, and then pushed past us to leave the same way we had entered. Our friend had an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was looking for another person with the same name were pretty low. None of us had ever seen this man before, and I knew most of our friend's family. When we described the man to our friend, he didn't know who it could have been either. We were too scared to go back for the next few months. When we did return about 3 to 4 months later, it was the middle of summer vacation. We thought it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing up, we found the roof to be weak and close to caving in, but something made us take the risk and venture out on the roof. A hole that seemed to be directly above the room we had never been in. The hole was about the size of a football. One of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm through the hole and film the room using her phone. She put her arm down, and as she was filming, she suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream and retracted her arm. Her phone was no longer in her hand. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand. Looking down through the hole, we saw her phone lying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof, entered the building, and were now intent on getting into the room to retrieve the phone. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door and put our hands inside. When we used the door handle from the inside, it opened without any trouble. We stepped inside and stared in silence. To this day, I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I hope it was never used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room was about 4 by 4 meters, and the floor and walls were all solid concrete. In the left corner were 2 metal bowls on the floor, and at the back were 5 chains dangling from the wall, 4 with equal-sized cuffs, and 1 large enough to fit around a neck. We swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. The room had us both scared and intrigued. After some discussion that same night, we decided to go back the following day. When we returned, the door was locked again, and someone had covered the hole we made with a large wooden board nailed to the door. We immediately left and never returned. I have no idea what we stumbled upon that day, but I am certain my days hanging out at that place sparked my interest in abandoned places. Today, I am an experienced member of the Urbex community and have had more sinister experiences with places like this that I might share with you another time. Since taking up Urbex, it has been a dream of mine to go back to that school and check if that room was still there. Unfortunately, the place no longer exists, and the area is now home to a thrift store. This story still gives me chills, kind of like something out of a horror film. A few years ago, my family, friends, and I took a vacation to Cuba to get away from the harsh cold weather back home. It was a pretty big resort, packed with people, and the nights were always full of drinking and fun. But there was one night that was pretty abnormal. When we bought our tickets, we got a package that included VIP club access at the resort. The workers would take the tourists in a mini bus to the club on the other end of the resort, as it was quite far. That night, I planned to stay sober because I wanted to make sure my friends and I got back to our room safely. We got to the club, and everyone else was dancing, drinking, and enjoying themselves. We met a group of girls who told us they were on break from college and had come down to Cuba for some time away from school. We partied with them all night. One girl in their group kept smiling at me when we danced and looked like she was talking to her friends about me. Since I was on vacation, I took my shot and tried talking to her. I asked her what her name was, and she pulled me close and whispered in my ear, "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." I laughed it off because she was smiling when she said it, and the music was loud, so she had to say it into my ear. Near the end of the night, around 3 a.m., they wanted to take a group picture. I had my camera for taking normal photos of scenery and such, so I gave it to a worker who took a big group photo of us. In the photo were all my friends and the other group of girls, and I had my arm around the girl I had tried talking to. After that, we said our goodbyes and went back to our room. When we got back, my friend, who shared a room with me, knocked out drunk and fell asleep. I couldn't sleep much as I was thinking about the girl and how much fun I had. I turned on my camera and started going through the photos of the night. What happened next, I will never forget. In the picture, the girl I had my arm around was an old lady with gray hair and a lot of wrinkles on her face. I almost threw my camera. I couldn't believe it. You might think I put my arm around someone else in it, but there weren't really any old ladies like that at the club, and I was completely sober. I turned off my camera, put it in my camera bag, and shoved it under my bed. The thought of that picture kept me up at night trying to figure out what the heck had happened. When I woke up in the morning, I gathered all my friends to show them. They didn't believe me. I pulled out my camera and went through the pictures, but the picture was gone. I went through all 572 photos, and it was gone. They didn't believe me. We went out for lunch at one of the restaurants at the resort, and we ran into the group of girls. When I asked them about that friend, they said, "Oh, we don't know her much. We just met her yesterday at the club. She said she's a student and studies in Connecticut." As soon as I heard that, I had chills all over my body. One of the most bizarre things to ever happen to me. It makes me scared to travel to foreign countries again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and devour the bell icon. If you have a story you would like to share, send it to creepychefmedia@gmail.com.